All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the March 2011 version of the Ethical Hacker Network webcast series. Today we're happy to bring you deep dive into red teaming with the Metasploit Framework. Today's webcast is sponsored by Rapid7, the company behind Metasploit. With us today is Rapid7's own James Egypt Lee. James has given numerous talks at various cons and is a core developer and project manager of the Metasploit Framework, and has been since about April of 2008. As stated in the description of the webcast, James will be taking all of you on a technical deep dive through the new features of the free and open source Metasploit framework, utilizing the recently released version 3.6. He will focus on techniques valuable to professional penetration testers in red teams and consulting firms. But before we get to the action, I just wanted to make sure that I tell all of you that yes, as I mentioned earlier, we will be recording this presentation and making the entire video available online on the Ethical Hacker Network. It's near the end of the month now, so by the time we get the recording and convert it and publish it and what have you, it'll probably be at the beginning of April that we'll get that live. And we will be contacting everyone in every means possible. So we'll be tweeting it, we'll be emailing you, it'll be listed on the Ethical Hacker Network any way we possibly can to let you know that yes, the video is online. Now, we also got some questions before while people were in the waiting room asking about the slide deck. And yes, that will also be made available at the time the video is published in PDF format. So we thank you in advance for your patience after the live event once we get that up and live. Also, this presentation will be a little under an hour, and then as always, we'll have questions and answers following that. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the question form in your own GoToWebinar control panel, and that little area for your questions is a different section from the chat section, so just keep that in mind. We'll do our best to answer all your questions. If we don't get to it, or if you think of something after the live webcast that you didn't think of during the webcast, well, don't worry. You can simply go to the Ethical Hacker Network forum thread for this very webcast, and your questions will be answered there. James will also be stopping by periodically in those forums to help in any way that he can to answer your questions or give you some guidance if that's possible. Also, this is going to be good for those who couldn't attend the live event and are listening to this in the recorded fashion, and then you have questions as well. Well, you can simply go to the forum thread, ask questions after the fact, and James will again be checking in periodically to see what he can do to help you. Now, the other thing we'd like to do today is to get a good feel for who's out there today, who is our audience. So we have a couple poll questions to introduce all of you to James today. So let's go ahead and launch that first one. And basically what we want to find out, and there we go, that should be showing up on your screens now, but basically, how are you using Metasploit now, if you're using it at all? So please tell us if you're using Metasploit. Do you use it daily? Do you use it every now and then? Has it been a while? Do you only use it, let's say, if you took a boot camp? Or have you never used it? Okay, we'll give you guys about a minute or so. It looks like already almost 80% of you have voted, and we'll go ahead and we will give you just a few more minutes to, or a few more seconds to answer that question. So far, it looks like 32% of you say yes every now and then. About 23% say that yes, but only in a learning environment. 19% of you say about yes daily. Let's go ahead and we're going to close this poll, and then we'll share it with all of you so you can see what the results are. And again, in addition to finding out a little bit about you, this also lets James know about you, just in case it makes gives him the opportunity to tailor a little bit of his presentation towards the audience. All right, well, thank you for doing that first poll. We're going to go on to a second poll now. And basically what we want to know is if you are actually using Metasploit, how are you using it? Okay, great. And those answers are starting to come in. All right, and jumping out to a quick early lead at 44% now is as an IT security professional. Next in line is for educational purposes. Then next we have as a consultant. Next in line we have red team. We have about 85% of those people who have voted. Give you guys just a few more seconds. All right, and it looks like those numbers are staying just about the same. So we're going to go ahead and close that poll for you and then share it with you so you guys can see what those results are, as well as James. All right, well, let me thank you first of all for joining us and also for participating in those polls. And now that you've introduced yourselves to us, well, now it's time for me to introduce all of you to James. So James, if you're out there, just wanted to say quickly hello and thanks for joining us today. I appreciate your time. Hi, everybody. All right, and I appreciate your time today. And just so if you guys want to see exactly what James looks like, there he is. And I will go ahead and turn this over to James. James, let me set you as the presenter here. And in just a second, you guys should be able to see James's desktop, and I will let you take it away and on with the show.
All right, so hopefully everyone can see that. Today we're going to start out with a little discussion of the Metasploit Framework architecture and how things are laid out in the library structure and how things all fit together. And then we're going to talk a little bit about modules and why they're important for how the framework works. Next we're going to go into a discussion of the latest module type for post-exploitation, and that's where we're going to spend most of our time today. It's a great new feature, and it gives us a lot of ability to really dig into a system once we compromised it. Then we're going to talk briefly about platform-agnostic payloads, and that's anything that we can run on more than just Windows. Then we'll get into a few of the coolest new commercial features that are available today in Express and Pro. And lastly, we'll go into a live demo. And once that demo is finished, we'll take some questions. And at the end of the questions, if there's some time left, we can possibly go back and do other demos if you're interested. I want to point out that this is for advanced framework users, and what that means basically is you understand some of the concepts of Metasploit. Hopefully have used it a little bit and can understand the ideas behind why you would want to compromise a system, all of those sorts of things. So firstly, our slides are going wonky. There we go. So firstly, the Metasploit project was founded in 2003 by H.D. Moore. He later picked up a couple more developers, Scape and Spoonim, and a few community contributors that transformed what was originally a game into a fully realized exploitation platform. That eventually got ported over to Ruby. It was originally Perl, and became the open source penetration testing platform that everybody uses. We've had over 1 million downloads in the past year. We have 120,000 active users who update at least once a week. Recently, somewhat recently, in terms of the project, the Metasploit framework was acquired in 2009 by Rapid7, and at that time, HD joined Rapid7 as CISO, and shortly thereafter, I came on as the open source project manager. It's important to note here that Rapid7 remains committed to the community. A lot of people were really skeptical about how that was going to work, whether the framework was going to become a proprietary beast that no one could play with anymore. But I think it's quite clear from how Rapid7 has treated the project that it has and will remain to be open source. It's under a completely free BSD license that you can take the code, modify it, use it however you'd like. And it's also important to note that the framework is the base for our commercial editions. It's the core that allows the commercial editions to run. So this is what the architecture looks like in a simplified graph. We start out with the Rex library, and this is a port of the original PEX library, which was the Perl exploitation library, and now it's the Ruby exploitation library. And that's where all of our protocols and various non-exploit specific things are implemented. But protocols and all of those other things are implemented in a way that makes exploitation possible. So, for example, our HTTP library is considerably different from a standard library because, you know, sometimes you want to conform to the spec and do exactly what RFC 2616 says, but sometimes you want to be able to deviate from that, and Rex makes all that possible. It's really difficult to modify headers in an incompatible way if you're using a standard library. So Rex allows us to make those kinds of changes to the protocol. Then MSF Core sort of sits on top of that and defines the framework itself. And that's where a definition for how modules should act lives. There are other things that build on top of Rex, giving us more control and more high-level interfaces to dealing with protocols and file formats and that sort of thing. All of that lives in MSF Core. And then sitting on top of Core is the base. And the base gives us a simplified means of talking to the framework itself. So base deals with session handlers and other sorts of high-level things that you need for talking to the framework and for using all those protocols defined in Rex. And we've got several interfaces that all tie into the base. And at any point, code in any of these sections can reference lower-level code. So modules can all directly access Rex protocols, Rex methods and classes, and Core can do the same, and anywhere along that chain. But we've got several interfaces, user interfaces, that talk to the Metasploit framework. And the first and the one that we're going to focus on today is the console. And that's where it's an interactive command line console that allows you to type commands and have stuff happen. So I assume that most of you are at least somewhat familiar with the console, and we'll play with that a little bit later. The CLI is a slightly less sophisticated idea where you just run a single exploit and it goes. We've recently added Armitage to the main framework tree, and Armitage and MSF GUI are both Java GUIs that allow you to, in a graphical way, talk to the framework. And lastly, we've got RPC, which is the backend that allows several other interfaces for dealing with Metasploit. MSF GUI, Armitage, several third-party cool little tools all use RPC, and the commercial editions also use it as their backend workhorse. But the meat and potatoes that everybody who knows anything about the framework mostly knows the modules. We've got all of these various kinds. They're more than just exploits, and I can't stress that enough. The Metasploit framework is not just a pile of exploits. It's a framework, and it contains all of the things you need, not only just to run those exploits, but to gain access in some way. And to do that, we need payloads. They're the arbitrary code you hear about in advisories. For our purposes, most of the time, that's Meterpreter. But we've also got shell sessions for cases where Meterpreter is not available, and VNC, which gives you a full interactive desktop. Next, we've got encoders, which are simply there to add entropy to the payloads, to make them more random so that they don't look quite so obvious on the wire. And their secondary purpose is to remove bad characters. So in an exploit, so for example, if we're using an overflow in a username in an FTP server, an @ symbol is a delimiter in a username. It means that's the end of the username and the beginning of the host that he's coming from. So if we have an @ symbol in our payload, the exploit itself will break. So we need some way to remove those characters in a generic way, and that's what encoders are for. A NOP is from the x86 instruction, no operation. It means that don't really do anything, but it doesn't need to specifically be the x86 instruction of 0x90. It can be anything that doesn't affect program flow. So it can be an increment, a register, doesn't affect the program flow, and as long as we don't care about that register, it acts as a no operation. So we create sophisticated NOP sleds to, again, add more entropy, and also to keep the size of payloads consistent. Lastly is an underappreciated module type of auxiliary. And lots of cool stuff is implemented in auxiliary. That's where all of our discovery happens. It's where port scanning and version discovery and all of those things happen in auxiliary modules. Also implemented here is browser autopwn, which is a module for fingerprinting and automatically exploiting browsers. And the reason I think it's underappreciated is because oftentimes, even without an exploit, having an authenticated session with some service can get you a shell. So we have numerous auxiliary modules for dealing with that, mostly through brute force and through other ways of determining whether a session is valid or whether a login session is valid. But now we've added post modules, and this is the newest module type, and this is where we're going to spend most of our time today. So back in the day, in 2003, the best way of dealing with post exploitation was with a shell. Metasploit improved that considerably when the port over to Ruby happened, and it gave us IRB. IRB is the interactive Ruby shell, and it allows you direct access to the framework objects, the session objects, and can give you a way to use control structures and arbitrary Ruby to deal with the session for so you can loop around a directory and recurse down there using pure Ruby. It's incredibly useful to be able to do this. A great example of the awesomeness that you can do with IRB is HD's talk about NTP at B-Sides last year, at B-Sides Las Vegas last year, was the scanning that he did was done entirely in IRB. So it was a giant loop that scanned the entire internet for a single port, and all of that was done in IRB. So we realized that IRB is really powerful, but it's difficult to automate. And as a solution for that automation, Meterpreter scripts were invented. And Meterpreter scripts are basically a free-form, flat Ruby file that gets evaled in the context of the session. And that gives us a whole lot of power and a really simple way of automating all of the post-exploitation stuff that you might want to do. And they have both good and not so good properties. One of the best things is that the file itself is reread before every run, so it makes development of them very easy. You just change the file, run it again, change the file, run it again, and it's very simple. You don't have to restart the framework. It's also a simple interface. It's really just a regular old Ruby file, so you can use arbitrary Ruby in there, and it can do anything Ruby can do. And it gives you access to everything that the framework has, all of those Rex libraries, methods for creating new payloads, so you can upload an executable, whatever you want to do, all of that is available. But it does have some downsides, and one of the biggest ones is that there's no structure. So because it's just a flat Ruby file, we don't have any of the metadata that you need. So we don't have author field, we don't have a description field, we don't even have a name for our scripts except for the file name. And the file names aren't necessarily all that useful for determining what the script actually does. There's also no generic compatibility checks, so there's no way to tell whether this is going to work on, say, Windows 2000 versus Windows XP versus Windows 7. And that brings us to another point, that all of the Meterpreter scripts are built or were originally built just for Windows, because Meterpreter only existed for Windows. Now that's changed. We've got Java, we've got PHP. POSIX is still sort of in the works, although the contributor who was working on it has since dropped off the map somewhat. So I'm hoping that will get picked back up and we'll have a POSIX Meterpreter sometime in the future. But next, the option parsing in Meterpreter scripts is ad hoc, and at the moment most of them use a simple dash letter method of dealing with options. But all those letters can be arbitrarily decided by the script, and so we don't have any standard way of dealing with options, and they don't necessarily mean the same thing across different scripts. So we need some better way to deal with that. And lastly, it's not easy to reuse code within scripts. Because of the way they're formatted, there's quite a bit of copy-paste, and copy-paste code leads to bugs introduced in one that don't affect another, and bugs fixed in one that is not fixed in another. So it'd be much better if we could reuse all of that code in one place. So the way we're planning on fixing that is post modules. They're, of course, the newest and least explored module type. So they don't have everything that they eventually will have. Post modules are still working up towards being totally awesome. Right now they're just awesome. They're a great place to start contributing to the framework, because very much like Meterpreter scripts, they're a fairly simple way to get started. They don't require a whole lot of Ruby to understand how they work. And they're intended to completely replace Meterpreter scripts. So to do that, they should retain the good aspects and improve the not-so-good aspects. And I want to point out here that the infrastructure for scripts will not go away, at least not for the foreseeable future. We're planning on supporting third-party Meterpreter scripts for at least a year. So any of your private repositories of post-exploitation plans in Meterpreter scripts, all of that will continue to work for at least a year. We're hoping to get community involvement and bring all of those third-party scripts up to the post-module format. So keeping the good, just like Meterpreter scripts, they're always reloaded whenever you run them. And when you run them from an MSF prompt versus just running through Meterpreter, you can use the reload command to reload them without running. Again, it's a simple interface. It has complete access to Ruby, anything Ruby can do, and anything the framework or a session can do. And in my opinion, it's actually easier than scripts, because there is some infrastructure already there available for you, much like exploit or auxiliary modules, versus scripts where you had to start essentially from scratch or copy-paste something. So the not so good. First is the structure. So if we can take a Meterpreter script and move it into a module format, we improve consistency. And this gives us the same format as exploits or auxiliaries or payloads or encoders. We have all of those modules that everyone is familiar with. Now scripts have the same format. And it makes all of our life cycle, from writing an exploit to using it to encoding a payload to go with it, and doing the post-exploitation after getting a session from it, all of those things are now set up in the same way. And this also gives us the metadata that we were missing before, like author, description, name, reliability in the case of an exploit. And it also improves the consistency of option setting. So now you can set options exactly like you did before when you were using an exploit. And we've also got some mix-ins for dealing with the very common things that you need to do in post-exploitation. Downloading and uploading files is a very common task task that needs to be easy to do regardless of what kind of session it is. So we've got these several mix-ins that make it easy to deal with files and for manipulating the registry, and there are definitely more on the way. We're also soliciting community interest for what kind of mix-ins that you think would be really helpful for post modules to do interesting things. And please talk to me afterwards if you have ideas for this. So using post-exploitation modules is very much like exploits. They can be active or passive, which means an active exploit or an active post module will run until it's done. And it does whatever it does, and when it's finished, you get your prompt back. A passive exploit or a passive post module will run in the background, and you can continue manipulating that session in other ways while that runs in the background. And you'll get your data when it finishes what it's doing. Like auxiliary modules, you have a run command, and also like auxiliary modules, exploit is an alias. So now you can use the exploit command in exploits, auxiliaries, or post modules. All post modules take a session option. If you're running it from the Meterpreter prompt, it is implicit, and you don't need to specify it. The compatibility checks, like we talked about for consistency before, are at the moment fairly simplistic. You can test for Meterpreter or shell types of sessions, and you can test for different platforms. We're also soliciting ideas for other ways to check compatibility, such as fiddling with the registry to figure out what kind of session it is, or other things that you might want to know. So other ideas for compatibility are welcome. So you can run directly from the Meterpreter prompt with the run command, and this is exactly like using scripts before. You give options in a variable equals value format, just like when running NSF payload at the command line. You can also run via the normal module interface. You use the module just like you use any other module type. You set variables and you run. Lastly, you can set an auto-run script in an exploit module, and this runs exactly like using auto-run script before. So the idea of auto-run script is you want, as soon as a session comes open, to fiddle with that session in some way automatically. So a common use for this is to migrate out of a dying process. It's very common for browser exploits to eventually crash the browser after gaining a session, or leave it in a hung state such that the user is going to kill that window. So what you commonly want to do is set an auto-run script of migrate, and that will immediately, as soon as the session opens up, jump into another process and prevent losing your session when that window is closed. So the next thing is Railgun. It's a step in the direction of total control of the session, of the target system. Railgun itself is not exactly new, but it's undergoing some major improvements. And we've got a community contributor named Xiaomu who is working diligently and creating a lot of really great interfaces for dealing with Windows API and all of the structures and data types returned by it. And hopefully that will move forward soon to give us even greater control of the target process and indeed the whole system. The idea of Railgun is that you can call any function in any DLL on the system, and that's really useful for using the normal Windows API functions for example, telling whether a user is an admin. But it also has some other various uses, and one of my favorite ideas is using an application's own API against it. The example here is Chrome and Firefox store their passwords in an encrypted SQLite database. But that password has to be in there somewhere, or they wouldn't be able to decrypt it themselves. So using their own DLLs, we can ask those applications what the password is, and decrypt the database. Just ask it to decrypt the database for us. Now, there's a lot of really cool things that can be done here, and I'd love to hear more ideas on using an application's API against it. So the next little bit is loot. Now, loot originated in our commercial versions and has since been pushed down into the open source version, and it's the simple idea of a place to store stuff you've stolen, the data that you've pulled off of a system. And it can be anything. It's all stored to a file. If you have a database active, we track each and every one of the files that you take, and this can be a process listing or environment variables or registry settings or whatever you think is necessary for pulling down, or whatever a post module decides is useful information and pulls down into loot. The great thing about this is you can really control the files that you want to see come down. We usually don't put passwords here. In some cases, there are exceptions. For example, if you have like a SHA-1 hash of a password, that by itself is not really that useful as a password, so we can store it as a loot. But if we have a password or a hash that we can use to log into something, such as an NTLM hash or like an SSH key, those should be stored in the creds table. And we also have stuff for dealing with credentials to help with brute force and to use our login modules for taking known credentials that we've stolen and using them elsewhere. So one of the awesome post modules already available is hashdump. It's obviously kind of the same idea as the hashdump command or the hashdump tool like fgdump. But instead of injecting to lsas.exe, it reads everything that it needs out of the registry. Since all of the stored password hashes are in the registry someplace, encrypted with a system key, we can just pull all that out. And the system key is also stored in the registry. So we get all of those things that we need, and we calculate up how to decrypt it ourselves, and we just pull the hashes out directly. So this is more stable than injecting into LSAS, which if it fails, injecting into LSAS forces a system reboot. And that's not usually something you want to do, especially on like a domain controller. So that's why we have a post module to do the same thing. There's an OSX version now, and this is a really cool little tool that Carlos Bettis put together. And it just reads the shadow files out of OSX's database, password databases. And it can pull SHA-1, NT, and LM hashes, and we can use those directly with PSExec or the like. Cache dump from Maurizio Agazzini is a third-party module that will eventually get merged into the trunk, but it serves as a good example of adding your own stuff or third-party stuff. If you see somebody else's post module out there, just like really any other module, you can take that and just put it in your home directories.msf3 modules directory, and it will work just as if it was in the official directories. Cache dump is really cool because it pulls things out in MS cache format, which is easy to use in Rainbow tables or in John the Ripper. So we've also got a few things in the works. One of the big ones is going from a shell session to Meterpreter, or from a non-native Meterpreter, such as Java or PHP, into a native Meterpreter. And the reason for that is generally we want as much control as possible, and a native executable gives us a lot more control than running in Java, for example. This also opens the door for local exploits, and this is something that Metasploit has been missing for a long time. Now we have all of the pieces necessary for building local exploit modules using the post module as a stepping stone. We already have modules for 4 Windows privilege escalations, and we have a generic service auditor which tests permissions of existing services to see if we can overwrite their executable or add in a DLL that will get automatically loaded, or any other way that we can abuse a service with weak permissions to give us a shell. We're also planning to implement Linux local exploits for shell sessions. And again, all of the pieces are there. We just need to get in there and write some exploits. And this is, again, is another great place for community contributions. If you're interested in writing Linux local exploits, there are a lot of them out there. Obviously, it's Linux. And we could really use the help. We also have a whole bunch of Meterpreter scripts that need to be ported. And most of that work is being done by Carlos Bettis again, who is our semi-official post-exploitation guy. So if you're interested in doing that kind of work, talk to Carlos Bettis, and he can help you in that transition from porting scripts to modules. So as I said, official modules live in the modules directory, and it is organized with subdirectories by module type. The same structure exists in your home directory .msf3, or if you're on Windows, just .msf3 in your users directory. Same idea, and if modules exist in that directory at startup time, MSF console will automatically load them. So next I want to talk about payloads. Java is really awesome for any kind of exploitation because it tends not to be as highly scrutinized as executables by antivirus. It also has the great advantage of, in situations where application whitelisting is happening on the host, java.exe or java.w.exe is always in that list. So if you upload a jar, you're not adding an executable to the system, and you're not running something that is not in the whitelist. So using a jar, you can still get your shell without triggering that mechanism for self-defense. And similarly with the WAR format, if for those of you unfamiliar, WARs are the container that holds servlets for things like Apache, or for things like Apache Tomcat and Oracle's Glassfish. And typically you can put JSP files in there or standalone .class files that don't need to be compiled. And you can take that whole thing and turn it into a Meterpreter shell. Next we've got PHP, and this is something that I worked on for several months last year. I did a talk about it at B-Sides Las Vegas. So if you want more information about PHP and PHP Meterpreter itself, go check out that presentation. There's some interesting little quirks with PHP. But I also want to point out that when using MSF payload to create PHP payloads, it dumps them out as raw, just regular text file that you can upload to the server, as opposed to Java, where you have to specify you want a jar format or a WAR format. And because of this, it's easy to just pipe it into any old PHP obfuscation engine that you have. Metasploit provides a base64 encoder that allows you to wrap the whole thing in an eval, and that's useful for obfuscation. Next is ASP, which isn't strictly platform agnostic, since obviously ASP only works on Windows, but it is the same sort of idea of a payload that isn't an executable, that runs on a web server and will give you a shell regardless of the existence of like application whitelisting and that sort of thing. So next is commercial feature highlights. ProConsole is the next step in our Pro line of products or our commercial line of products. It gives you a full MSF console with everything that MSF console can do, and a whole bunch of what Pro can do. So for those of you who are more familiar with the command line, or just like the warm glow of your terminal, Metasploit Pro Console gives you all of that in a neat little package, and you can work with others in your team using the web UI of the regular Express and Pro. And since all of that is tied together, your teammates who prefer a web UI can use Pro as in its normal format, and you can continue to use MSF Pro console, giving you full access to the command line, all of the exploits, and several very nifty additions to MSF console for Pro specifically. All of our post-exploitation modules are also available in Pro in the Sessions tab, and it gives you access to any of the ones that are compatible with that session, so you can gather more information and potentially gain more access through post modules. Next is host tags, and this is one of my favorite features of the new commercial products. Tags are sort of a way to group hosts together. So you can tag a set of hosts as servers and another set of hosts as clients, and you can separate those out and report on them differently, or however you want to deal with those hosts. You can also put these in, you can put tag names in any of our included addresses fields. So say you want to run a brute force against all servers, you can just say #servers in your included addresses. And I also want to point out that Ryan Lin did a great Ethical Hacker video on using some of the cool new features in the commercial versions of our products. So if you haven't seen that, please check it out. Demos. This is the fun part. If I can find my shell. There we go. So you can see here I have exploited a Windows system with the venerable 08067, and now I have a session on this machine, and I can get information about it using various commands. But I want to show you running. So first, the original hashed script. And as I said before, this just pulls everything that you need to know out of the registry and calculates the decryption all on its own. And you can see we get administrator hashes. And we can use those directly with psexec or any other exploit that takes SMB passwords. Now, in a more structured way, we can run the post module that does the same thing. And you'll see that this output is exactly the same. There we go. Now, we can run that, set that in the background. We can also use any module, just like using an auxiliary or an exploit. Show options, just like when you're using any of the other module types. We always have to set a session for post modules, and note that this tab completes with only sessions that are compatible. And if we run that, you'll see a list of environment variables. So now that we've gathered all this cool little information, one of the really nifty things is now we can report on that information using the Pro UI authentication tokens. So here you see all that information that I just gathered. Yeah, so are there any questions?
All right. Well, thank you so much. That was awesome. And there are some questions that have been coming in. First one is you had mentioned some videos that Ryan Lynn did on the Ethical Hacker Network. And just for those of you who are listening, the article is actually entitled Video, and there's actually a set of 3 videos on there. And it's a pen test walkthrough with Metasploit Pro. So it's actually a very excellent article that has a little bit of a write-up, 3 separate videos that literally takes you through the entire pen testing process using Metasploit Pro. And if you go to ethicalhacker.net, you can see it right there on our front page. On the left-hand side, you can also see it listed under latest editions. And also Ryan Lynn is a regular columnist. So if you go on the top and click on columns and then Lynn, you'll see the list of that article as well as others. Now let's see here. We do have a few others. People would like for you to discuss some of the stability issues of using Metasploit on Windows.
So a lot of our problems on Windows are from the installer. But once all of that is handled and the permissions are set correctly, in general, Metasploit is pretty stable on Windows. There are a couple of restrictions that Linux does not have. So at least in home versions of Windows, there is a limit on the number of sockets that a user can have at one time. So running highly threaded scanner modules and stuff is going to be a lot slower on Windows. In 3.5, we finally fixed a major bug with readline that was preventing, basically anything usable on a regular CMD shell. But now that is fully functional, and you can run Metasploit in cmd.exe. It looks terrible because cmd.exe is stupid, but what are you going to do?
Okay, do you want to discuss some of the ways that people, if they would like to start contributing modules for the Metasploit framework, where would you recommend that they start? I noticed that as you were going through the presentation, you named a whole bunch of different areas that you would like participation and like contributions from the community. And there were several questions out there about where do I go to start? How can I start learning in order to help contribute and also write modules?
Okay, so the first place to start is our ticket tracker, and that's it's linked somewhere on Metasploit.com. But find the Redmine ticket tracker, and that lists a whole bunch of known issues that need to be addressed. If you're more interested in just writing modules, we have an internal exploit to-do list, and if you're interested in that, contact me and I can get you access to that list. For post-exploitation modules, like I said, talk to Carlos Perez about the things that currently need ported and any new ideas that you might have for new modules. The next step is once you've written something, you can either email it to msfdev@metasploit.com or create a new ticket in our Redmine tracker with a patch attached to it. And that is the easiest way for us to deal with patches.
Okay, we have some additional questions. I'm not sure if this is before your time, but people want to know what was the main reason behind the switch from Perl to Ruby?
That was before my time. I didn't start until well after Metasploit was written in Ruby, but I did use the framework back then, and I can tell you that Perl is not ideally suited for this kind of tool. The object model is not nearly as clean, and Ruby is a great tool for building Metasploit. It gives us a great deal of control of reuse of code, and it has a lot of features that Perl is simply missing.
Okay. Some other questions out there, and pardon me if these are kind of all over the place. Questions come in at different times, so we'll just do our best. Does the RPC provide SOAP or RESTful web services?
It's regular old XML RPC over TCP. So you can access it via a RESTful method. If you start up XML, or if you load XML RPCD and give it a web flag, that'll start it as RESTful. So Ryan Lin is actually a really great guy to talk to about building new tools on top of XML RPC. He's done some great work in creating a Python client for it. So if you're interested in that, talk to him.
Awesome. We have a lot of questions out there that are dealing with the difference between the Metasploit Framework and Metasploit Pro. I know that you had mentioned some things as you were going through the presentation as to what the Pro version has, and you briefly showed some of the reporting features. People want to know if you can just touch a little bit more on things like advanced commands, evidence collection, and team collaboration.
Some of my favorite features are tags that I talked about that I think are really just amazing. It allows you to keep all of your machines, all of your systems in a much better organization. We've also got a lot of post-exploitation automation. So many of the post modules that I talked about today are tied together in a simple collect menu in Metasploit Pro. Obviously the reporting is huge. There's no simple way of reporting from the framework, and we've even got PCI findings now, so you can create an addendum for your PCI report. Let's see. In fact, I can just show a couple of cool little things. We have a web app scanner. You can run modules directly, so if you know the particular module that you want to run, you can do it directly from here, and it gives you a point-and-click interface to the same things that the MSF console can do. Sessions, I don't have my active session here anymore, but you get a full audit log of everything you did on a session, as you can see here. You can create email campaigns and send an executable or an exploit to any number of addresses. There are a whole bunch of really awesome things that Metasploit Pro can do that MSF console can't.
Hey, James, there's another question while you're in this area. Someone's out there asking, is there any way to specify a range of sessions, or is it just going to list all the sessions?
From MSF console, right now you can only list all of them. That's a great feature request. If you're interested in that functionality, create a Redmine ticket for it, and it seems like it would be really useful to be able to list only a certain range.
Are there any interests or plans at the moment to add some kind of reporting engine to the open source side of the framework?
Not at the moment. And part of that is just the infrastructure differences. There's a lot of stuff in Pro that makes reporting possible that we simply don't have in the framework.
Okay, lots more questions, and we're going to try and get to them all. And looking at the time, we're right at about the end of our time. So if anyone wants to drop off right now, please feel free to do so. But James has already told me in advance that he's more than happy to stay and answer some more questions. So we're going to keep going. For those of you that are going to drop off now, we thank you so much for your time. Again, the video and the slide deck in PDF format will be made available on the Ethical Hacker Network at a later date, probably in a week or two. At the beginning of next month. So we will do our best to get that out to you as soon as possible. Thank you for joining us, and we're just going to move right into some additional questions. Here's a good one. The Nmap scripting engine. So can we utilize NSE scripts as we're utilizing Metasploit?
Yes and no. So Todd recently added a way to deal with Nmap scripting stuff through Metasploit, and that gives you a great deal of power. And you can use all of the Nmap scripts or Nmap itself directly through a mixin, and it's really awesome. And the downside is because it uses system sockets rather than Metasploit's own socket implementations, you can't run it through a route. So if you set up a route that goes through a compromised system and allows you to that normally allows you to run any of your exploits or auxiliary modules through the session and just route all of your traffic through there. You can't do that with Nmap scripts because they use system sockets.
Okay, some of the other cool things, as you mentioned, there's some differences between Metasploit Pro and some of the other products that you guys offer. But one of the main differences is doing some VPN pivoting. Can you just talk a little bit about the differences between proxy pivoting, VPN pivoting, and some of the features of Metasploit Pro and how it handles VPN pivoting?
Yes, VPN pivoting is very awesome. It creates a tap interface on your local machine, and you can run arbitrary Ethernet traffic over that interface, and it gets tunneled through to the target. This means that you can use Nmap or any other Ethernet-capable tool through a Meterpreter session, and all of that gets tunneled through on the target side, and it's amazingly powerful. The difference between that and a proxy pivot is that you can only use TCP and UDP traffic over a proxy pivot, and we don't create a new interface for that, so it can only really be used through MSF console or one of the other Metasploit interfaces. You can't use other tools, like we mentioned with Nmap scripting. But that's still very powerful. You can still route through a session and, for example, browse the local internet from that client. And this gives you a good way to see the network on the other side, and B, see the network as it's viewed by that client. So in some cases, a resource will only be available to a particular host via either router ACLs or some firewalling. And so if you compromise a host that has access to those resources, then you can use a route or a VPN pivot and tunnel all the way through and talk to that resource that you wouldn't normally be able to get.
Awesome. Lots more questions here. What is the ratio of post-exploitation modules for Windows versus other platforms?
Right now, it's a whole lot to not very many. Most of our scripts were originally written for Windows because that's what was available at the time. Since then, we've worked on making them a little more platform agnostic. So a few of the things that should work anywhere now do. For example, the env module that I showed earlier that allows you to dump the environment variables on the target system, that now works in any version of Meterpreter or any shell session. And several other modules are working towards that as well. But the short answer is almost all of them are for Windows with a few exceptions.
Getting lots of questions about eventually adding features, exploits, so I guess on both ends, about running Metasploit on tablets and smartphones as well as attacking tablet to smartphones as they become more prevalent in the enterprise.
Yeah, so the big difficulty in running Metasploit from a tablet or a smartphone is that Ruby has very crappy support for tablets and smartphones. So it's mainly a problem with getting a working Ruby that isn't broken in some strange way on one of those systems. We had it working for a while on iPod Touch and iPhone, but the performance on those phones is not ideal. So we're hoping that at some point in the future we'll be able to make that step forward, but right now we're limited by the Ruby interpreter itself on those platforms.
And also, can you use the Metasploit Pro web interface through any browser? I kind of know that answer. It's a softball, but there you go. So, example, if you're using your iPhone or your iPad or anything else, you can just simply use the web interface.
Yep, absolutely. You can use any browser. We test compatibility on Internet Explorer, Firefox, and Safari. Occasionally little things slip through that make the layout a little funky, but it'll work from any browser, and it's just a regular old web interface. So you can definitely do it from an iPad or whatever.
Awesome. Some of the things that you mentioned in getting them to work on other platforms is issues with Ruby. So we have lots of questions out there, and I'm not sure if this exactly has to do with this, but since we have you on the line, we might as well get your expertise. Can you suggest some beginner's guides to Ruby, Ruby for Metasploit, or general Ruby stuff? Just some suggestions for people out there who either are programming now, haven't programmed, but are interested in eventually contributing to MSF.
Okay. If you've never done any programming before, I really suggest Why the Lucky Stiff's Guide to Ruby Programming, and it's sort of the introduction to programming using Ruby, and it's a great start for someone who's not familiar with programming at all. If you're already a programmer and you feel comfortable learning a new language, the RailsAPI.com documentation is really spectacular, and it's easy to figure out what classes have what methods, and it's more than just Rails on that website. If you click around, you can find all the documentation for pure Ruby. The best guide for Metasploit doesn't really exist. There's for writing Ruby for Metasploit, really the best way to learn is to read other stuff written for Metasploit. A lot of modules out there are very straightforward, and if you've spent any time at all with another scripting language, Python, Perl, or even like Bash, you should be able to pick up Ruby in a week, at least enough Ruby to start writing modules and things.
Okay. A lot of people are starting to ask about not only some of the differences between Metasploit Foundation and Metasploit Pro, but what's the roadmap specifically for Framework?
All right. So the roadmap has several points along the way right now. Obviously, fix bugs is high on that list. We always got bugs because we've got a giant code base, but there's also the post-exploitation move from scripts to modules. There's a lot of work being done in just post-exploitation in general, abstracting a few of the common tasks, putting them into mix-ins that everything can use. Railgun is going to be a major focus in the next couple of months. For community contributions, I'd really like to focus on post modules because because it's new. It's sort of a deficiency in our module list right now. Other things, I had a big list, and in fact, I'm going to be doing a blog post about the roadmap as it comes up in the next couple of weeks. So look for that in a few days.
Okay. Several others still coming in here. First of all, let me just say there are a lot of comments and not necessarily questions coming in saying awesome presentation. So I just want to throw those kudos your way. Somebody says that their question concerns the last topic about the demo for the post-exploitation scripts. They want to know why you just didn't run the set command in the shell.
I'm not sure I know what you mean. Yeah, I don't follow that question. I did run the set command, set session.
Well, no problem. we'll just move on to some other questions. Let's see here. Give me just a second, scrolling through a whole bunch of them here. And some of those are similar questions. Haha, here's one on Metasploit for the droid. Any comments?
It's a possibility, but again, we're limited by the Ruby interpreter. There were discussions at some point about getting JRuby to work on the Android platform, but that doesn't help us all that much because JRuby still isn't quite Ruby. It's missing a few things, specifically in socket land, that make it difficult to use all of the Metasploit features.
Here's one. You had mentioned Armitage, and someone wanted to know some of your own thoughts on Armitage. Do you like it, and where do you think it's going?
I do like it. It's pretty, and that's really important in some situations where, for example, getting people into hacking. It's essential to have something that draws people, and having a pretty interface with cute little pictures of lightning bolts owning a machine. I think that can go I think that can go a long way to bringing new people into security, and it also has the advantage that you can show it to a CEO, and they're much more likely to understand that than a prompt in a terminal.
Speaking of getting people into hacking, there are a few questions here on resources for getting into and learning Metasploit Pro, either through online training, videos, anything along those lines.
Well, like I said, and like you pointed out, Don, the Ethical Hacker Network has several videos from Ryan Lin about using Metasploit Pro. There are also a number of videos on SecurityTube and YouTube. And as for just general Metasploit usage, there are tons and tons of videos available to show you all of the steps of owning a machine and all of the various ways that you can use Metasploit to gain access that may not necessarily involve an exploit. There's also Metasploit Unleashed, which is a fantastic attempt at documenting the usage of Metasploit. And that's put together by Offensive Security, and they've done a really great job of simplifying it down and really giving you the guts of how it works.
Okay, some more specific questions. Somebody wants to know, is there any modules to do a reverse HTTPS connection through an authenticated web proxy?
Yes, kind of. There is a payload for doing that. It's a stager that allows you to connect using the WinINet API, which takes all of the Internet Explorer settings and allows you to connect out through the proxy. There are a couple of issues with it, namely that it doesn't work in scenarios where, for instance, you're running a system and you don't have access to the user profile, or where the WinINet profile is not the user default. So in that scenario, it doesn't really work, but it does work quite well for things like browser exploits.
Cool. Just so you know, there's a lot of people out there asking about price, and one of the things that James and I talked about in our rehearsals for this webcast is that A, he's a coder. B, he doesn't do he doesn't do compliance work, although I think he did show you a PCI compliance report there during his demo. But C, the other thing is he is not a marketer. So anyone who's interested in sales and pricing information on Metasploit Pro, please feel free to just go to rapid7.com and they can handle all that, all those issues for you here. Now back onto the technical questions. Will you be extending the NSE Lua integration for scripting with Nmap?
Probably. There are some cool things that can be done there. But like I said, they do have the disadvantage that it won't go through a Meterpreter route. That also means that we don't have the ability to run them through proxies or support SSL. But it's still a very cool idea, and it will probably see some more work in the coming months.
Okay, going through some additional questions here. Will Metasploit have any plugins for assembly language programs?
It already kind of does. It includes Metasm, which is a pure Ruby assembler and compiler, and it can assemble several different architectures, and we use Metasm for several of our payloads already. You can also use Metasm within an exploit module in the case that you need some specific instructions to be at a specific address or whatever. But Metasm is a very powerful tool, and if you haven't taken a look at it and you're interested in assembly, please go look at Metasm. There's so much cool stuff you can do with it.
All right. Well, you had mentioned that you had done some demos, and people are asking for additional demos to ask away. So we're getting some requests for you to do a demo on web app scanning, if possible.
Oh, I don't have my web app VM running. Give me a second here. Okay, so this should, oh, I forgot about this machine. This should work too. Okay. Cross your fingers. So oh, that's not my web app VM. Well, you get the idea. It's fairly simple to set up a crawler, and once you've crawled a site, you get interesting information about it up here. Once you've done a scan, let's say we want to audit. Oh, this box of forms. Okay, well, apparently my web app VM doesn't have any web apps. Yeah, there's I think there are a couple of videos about this on SecurityTube. I'm not entirely sure of that, but I know that HD has done a couple of things with web apps in videos. So I can look around for other videos that are available for that particular piece.
Okay, cool, no problem. Well, we're about 20 minutes after. We still have some more questions going on. You mind hanging out for another 10 more minutes?
No, that's great.
Awesome. Some people are asking about the development of the different projects. So how much of the pro version will eventually make its way into the framework? We also have some questions in there about how do features that are implemented or being actively developed in the framework eventually make their way to the pro version?
In general, everything in the framework is in Pro. There are a few things that the Pro UI does not expose, but they're still there in the underlying implementation. So using MSF Pro Console will allow you to take advantage of everything that MSF Console can do. Going the other way, many of the features have already trickled down to MSF Console. One of the next coming up things is a sessions overhaul that gives us a much better view into a session's input and output using a ring buffer, and doing it that way allows us to talk to the same session from multiple places and see the same output. It also lets you read the backlog of a session and get an idea of what has already been done. So yes, lots of stuff has already trickled down, lots of stuff is going to trickle down, but I can't get into the specifics.
Okay, I'm just going through some of the additional questions here. Okay, and a lot of these we have covered. Here's well, while we're at it, you've given a lot of technical information about the products and their various versions. So we have some, not too personal, but some personal interest. What product did you use to get your hair that big? So I politely answered that question of saying, what happens at DEF CON?
Right.
Unless you felt like expanding.
I do, and I will. I don't honestly know what product it was, except that there was glue involved. At DEF CON last year, I raised through donations over $1,000 for EFF, and due to that, got quite a haircut. I had been growing my hair out since 2002, and it was over 2 feet tall when it was finished.
Very cool. A lot of people are also commenting that you did some training at CanSec West. Any chances of an online version of your training?
Yes, I did a training at CanSec West, and I will be doing a similar training at DerbyCon later this year. But there are no plans at the moment for an online version.
Okay. How does the campaigns portion compare to the SCT set tool set?
I haven't done a direct comparison. I think there is some overlap. There's quite a bit of overlap, and campaigns are better at some things, and set is better at other things.
Where can someone find the Beyond R57 B-Sides PHP talk?
Live stream. Still had a copy last I looked, but beware, there's quite a bit of profanity.
Well, we are getting personal here now, aren't we?
Well, it involves PHP, which is a topic close
that
to
can be
mine.
frustrating.
Yeah.
Someone here is asking, can you please tell us a little bit more about migrating a payload from one process to another?
Okay, so migrating has been around since the early days of Meterpreter, and the idea is fairly simple. Using the Windows API, we can suspend a process, inject into its memory, inject anything we want into its memory, modify its registers, and tell it to continue. So doing that, it basically gives us full reign to inject our own shellcode in some read-write-execute memory, set EIP to the beginning of that buffer, and tell the process to continue. So when we do that, we create a thread in the target process so that we don't interrupt its own functioning, and that gives us a way to completely move from one process into another. I hope that explained it.
Okay, let's move on here. Let's see. Someone says, once you impersonate a token, how can you set up the session with another server host using the impersonated session?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. And again, pardon me, just reading questions that are sent in. It's a question on impersonating the token. Once you have impersonated a token, can you, or if so, how can you set up a session with another server or host using the same impersonated session?
Not quite. You can use a token to create users, but you cannot use a token to for example, PSExec or the like, to another machine. There is currently a ticket tracking that at some point I would really love to be able to do exactly what you're suggesting, but right now you can't do it.
Okay. We're getting pretty close to the end of the questions here. Is there a way to log all input-output from the console in the free version of Metasploit?
Yes, there's actually a global option for that. So if you type setg, you see a list of several things, and if you tab that out, one of the things here is session logging, and another is console logging. And if you set either or both of those to true, you will get a log of all input and output.
Okay, here's another one. You talked about using Metasploit for red teaming. Is there any way to configure the open source MSF console to capture session information and then submit them into a team folder to be used to reconstruct all actions taken during a pen test and which were successful and which were not? Now, I know in Ryan Lynn's videos, I know you are able to capture all that information in the pro version, but I think they're asking specifically here about the open source version, which would be the Metasploit Framework.
Yes. So using session logging, like I just showed, you'll get a full log of everything that happened in a flat file. Even without that, all sessions create events in the database. So if you have the database connected and everything is all set up to deal with it, you can extract everything that happened on all sessions from the events table. There's no direct interface to do that in the framework, but it is available in the database if you're willing to pull it out.
All right. Now, there are a few more questions on here, and so what I do want to do is kind of wrap things up just because we are getting down to the to our time limit here. So let me just go ahead and first of all say thank you to Rapid7, thanks to Egypt, and I'm going to go ahead and change this here so you can see, show my screen now. And as we mentioned before, there will be additional Q&A for those who either didn't get their questions answered today or are watching the live video, or I'm sorry, the recorded video after the fact. So you can go to ethicalhacker.net and look for the Webcast logo that you may or may not have seen already on the top of the right-hand column. And with that, we just want to thank everybody. Are there any closing words or statements that you'd like to tell everyone?
Thanks for coming.
Enough said. All right, well, thank you, everyone. We hope to continue these webcasts as we move through 2011. Stay tuned to the Ethical Hacker Network for announcements of those, contests, articles, all kinds of other cool stuff for the pen testing community. We thank you, and we say goodbye.